In the latest edition of Your Money This Week, looking back at the top money stories from the last 7 days, I'm joined by money journalist Faith Archer. Some of the stories we're going to cover today, well, as you'd imagine, the reopening of more and more of the high street. Restaurants, indoors, museums, cinemas, things like that. We're going to talk a little bit about holiday bookings, which you might be able to sort of make over the next few weeks and months. We're looking at savings. How many people actually don't have any money saved up at all? Good and bad news for renters, and much, much more. Enjoy. Faith, thank you so much for coming back onto the Your Money This Week episode of Cash Chats to help me have a look at some of these big money stories from the last 7 days. And there's one big thing that's been dominating the last few days and will dominate next week. And it is that next step on the roadmap out of lockdown, the restrictions loosening again. And we're going to be able to do more from next week, aren't we? From Monday the 17th. Slightly kind of hopefully getting back to more of a normality.
Definitely edging closer. I must admit, I just find all the changes incredibly complicated. And as far as I was concerned, it's the stuff to do with people that matters most to me. I haven't been trying to, get out and nail every shop there is and return to all the pubs. For me, it's been much more to do with going to see grandparents. And I even there's an invitation to a barbecue. More than 6 people in the diary now.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the thing. So the main thing that I think the rule-wise that people kind of need to be aware of, and I think lots of people are confused or just fed up of all these changes all the time, but just so people are clear, restaurants and pubs, you can now go, well, from Monday, you'll be able to go inside, but it's rule of 6, unless there are 2 households, in which case, in England at least, there is no limit to how many people within those 2 households. Scotland and Wales, slightly different. Obviously, we're talking about a week later in all of this for Northern Ireland. They've still not confirmed what's going on there. But it does mean you can go in for a meal. And that's going to be a big boon for some of these pubs and restaurants which haven't opened yet because they had no outdoor seating or not really enough of it to make it viable. Still going to have that social distancing inside that 1 metre plus. You're still going to have to wear your mask when you go into the loo or go into your table or whatever. And it's still not necessarily going to be perfect for lots of places. It's still going to be very difficult to get the number of covers, I guess, that you need to make things viable. But good news for a lot of these businesses that have had their doors shut and been, if they have at all, they've been surviving on takeaway orders. So that's one of the big things that we can look forward to. Obviously, outside at pubs and restaurants, it's up to 30 people. As you said, same at people's households as well. Larger groups, which would be nice. But the thing that I think is kind of, obviously, restaurants, I think, is a really big, important part. But I'm also kind of, although not necessarily have loads of these near me where I live, but theatres and museums and these kind of places are going to open up again. And this idea that you can actually do something with those people you're catching up with, that sounds lovely.
Yes, I think, aside from the hospitality sector, the whole of arts and culture, so much of it has been put on hold after the last year completely. And my heart goes out to all the self-employed people in those sectors whose livelihood just completely disappeared. So I'm excited. Yesterday I booked a couple of tickets to take my daughter to see a musical in London, knowing that we, fingers crossed, it will actually go ahead this summer.
Yeah, because theatres haven't been open since since March 2020. Yeah. The last thing that I did in any kind of large, big capacity, with lots of people around me, was actually went to the theatre in the West End. I was down in London early March, and I went to saw a play. And I've not actually been surrounded by that many people in that kind of environment now for 14, 15 months. So that will be exciting. Obviously, still social distancing that will have an impact on the atmosphere, and there are still plenty of these. As you say, cultural things that we do that haven't opened up again. So gigs still aren't, back on the cards just yet, I don't think. But that, I think, will be really interesting to see that. And really, as you say, important for those areas to get, hopefully, people in there and spending their money. The other big area that's opening up is travel and holidays, not just abroad, yes, which we covered in a lot of detail in the podcast on Tuesday, but we can stay overnight in Airbnbs and hotels and stuff here in the UK as well from Monday. So that's going to be good news. Have you got any holiday plans for this year, home or abroad?
We did. I must admit, I've taken the safety route. I made the call. We've booked, it's only about a week, but going and self-catering in Kent. We can take the dog and looking at the traffic light system for traveling abroad with all the restrictions in different countries, not all of them that will accept visits from us, and the potential for quarantine, the potential for having COVID tests. I mean, that cost adds up when you're a family of 4. So we are sticking in the UK this year.
Yeah, I mean, if you haven't already, please do check out the episode from Tuesday, episode 193, where we talk in detail about what the traffic light system is and some of these costs. But I said in that episode, it's not going to be smooth sailing on holidays. It's not going to be sort of back to how it was, just to book and go. And actually, this week, we've seen some more developments with one of the big holiday operators saying they're not going to sort of go ahead with this.
Yes, and I think that's one of the costs that perhaps as a consumer we underestimate. The costs to travel agents, tour operators, airlines, Eurostar, the costs of rearranging the travel, all the pressure if you book tickets that then have to be cancelled or moved. Which travel agent was it?
This was On the Beach. He was talking to BBC 5 Live's Wake Up to Money.
And I think it's so interesting that they just said, you know what, we're not going to book holidays abroad over the summer holidays, because there is just such a loss in terms of staff time, but also in goodwill when people book holidays and are then disappointed because they can't go on them. Yeah,
I think that's such a huge thing. You think about how many people have had a bad experience trying to rearrange their holidays over the last year. And you'd imagine if they've gone through that, they're going to think twice before they book with them again. So makes sense that this company's going, right, do you know what? If we're just not available in this summer, June, July, August, you can't book holiday with us. They're going to avoid that. And hopefully it doesn't sort of mean that they're going to miss out too much on the profits, which they are sorely, this travel industry has particularly sort of struggled over the last, year and a bit, that it's not going to be too much for them. The high street, that's obviously been open now for 3 or 4 weeks now. It's not, I mean, the rain, I don't know about where you are, but it's been a weird May. We've had like beautiful sunny mornings followed by the most ridiculous sort of hail in May and thunderstorms. So, I mean, that won't have helped the high street anyway, but there's some interesting ones that will be worth chatting about here, about how, as we see the last ever Debenham store closing up, shutting shop this weekend, then they're going to be completely gone at online presence only. How a couple of retailers are thinking they might attract customers in.
Well, I mean, I think good luck to them for attracting the customers they can, because the pandemic has been such a terrifying time for the high street, really accelerating the move to online sales. That it was there, it was present, but it's just ramped up so fast. Personally, I'm kind of mourning the death of so many high street brands. It kind of feels like my whole, all my teenage years in Oasis and Warehouse and Topshop, and they just aren't going to be present on the high street anymore.
It's weird, isn't it? And it's kind of, so this is what Selfridges are going to allow weddings in their London store. While Pret is going to start opening up concessions, I guess, in Tesco stores. Just trying to sort of, again, change what's going on. And there was a story also recently about Sainsbury's recruiting the ex-head of John Lewis to run their kind of stores to try and make them a bit more like a department store. So a Sainsbury's, you'd go in and there'd be a whole habitat section and a 2 clothing section and all these things going on. It's just showing they're going to have to adapt. They can't sort of stay put, because everything, as you said, that was happening before has been really accelerated. So, where will they? Would you, if you were to get married again, get married in a Selfridges?
Well, I'm not sure I'd necessarily pick Selfridges. Although, it's a very iconic building, and it looks like Selfridges are laying on all kinds of extra services, the 4-hour DJ set, or, offering people a more green alternative. They'll serve organic wine for your service. So they really are trying to press all the buttons and encourage people in. I think it's very interesting, the Pret development, because they have been so associated with office workers. And, again, talking about accelerating trends, the move from high street to online shopping. We've seen the accelerated move towards flexible working from home. And Pret may be realizing they just cannot be reliant on such enormous traffic, such enormous footfall in city centre stores. But you do wonder, given Tesco does kind of perfectly reasonable meal deals, will people actually be willing to pay that premium price for Pret products, just so they can go to a branch of Pret in a supermarket.
Yeah, I mean, and they closed down a huge number of their stores during the pandemic for good. They're not going to reopen. And this just feels like it's, well, yeah, there might be people in these supermarkets, but it's, as you say, a very, very different customer to who were using it before. And I mean, I'm not a coffee drinker, but it's, you've got to really love Pret or whoever it might be who does this kind of stuff to go out of your way to go and get that particular coffee. If you haven't got a nice local coffee shop around the corner from you, now you're working from home, that you can just pop to instead.
Yeah, I mean, certainly for me, I did used to eat at Pret sometimes, but it was a convenience thing. It was a location thing. It was handy and familiar if I was working away from home. And I'm not sure I'd necessarily be in a position to make a special trip to a Tesco's.
So, I mean, all this stuff, all these things reopening, hopefully people, if they feel safe and if it is safe, they will get out there and will spend some of their money. And we've heard this a lot, though. We've heard a lot about when you reopen things, there's this huge stash of money that people have been hoarding over the last year because they've not been spending it on their stuff. And I've probably been guilty of that to a certain extent as well, talking about what to do with your spare money, what to do with your spare cash. But it's always really important to acknowledge that not everyone is better off now than they were a year ago. And there's been some new research, hasn't there, that shows the extent of this divide.
Repeated studies have shown that it has just widened existing gaps. That you do have people who have saved money during the pandemic. If they haven't been commuting, haven't had travel costs, couldn't spend their money on holidays or eating out or going to the theatre, the cinema, the pub. And on the other side of the coin, there are obviously people who lost their jobs, were on furlough and reduced wages, or their self-employed business just everything disappeared and they've been in really dire financial straits. So I think it has had an impact. So things like people's emergency savings, some people very much have been able to top up emergency savings, but then also some of the most recent research was that 1 in 4 had no emergency savings of any kind. Yeah. And that's why, because then, you if some kind of financial emergency comes down, their car tires blow up, the washing machine breaks down, you can only rely on debt, borrowing. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's just some research from Hargreaves Lansdown that, as you say, 1 in 4 have no emergency savings. It's a huge, that is a huge amount of people. And the vast majority of them, I would assume, are people who can't have emergency savings. It isn't a choice thing. It's not like, I'm just going to spend all my cash. Of course, there will be some people, there always are people who spend more than they probably should do, more than they earn and stuff. But it's a hefty number of people who, all it takes, as you say, is one thing to go wrong and they have to borrow, they have to get into debt. And I think this report says that 38% of people had an unexpected expense in the past 12 months. So a huge number of people had something they didn't think was going to come along, and it cost them on average £1,420. Now, even the people who have got some emergency savings, that could wipe out a lot of it. But if you've got nothing, where do you go? £1,400 when you don't have any emergency savings, you've probably already got debts. That's a lot of money to add on top.
Yeah, that's a huge sum. You're not going to find that down the back of the sofa.
No. And I think it's, we talk about on this show quite a lot about some of these stories around debt and telling people where they can go to get support. And this week was Mental Health Awareness Week. And I think that's always a really important thing to consider when it comes to people who have money worries, who don't have enough money to live a more comfortable life. Because those things, they're intrinsically linked, aren't they? Mental health and money worries, they kind of feed on each other.
Yeah, it's a vicious circle, isn't it? If you, for people suffering from mental health conditions, it does make it more difficult to earn money, to manage money, and potentially also to control your spending. But then equally, if you're having money worries, that can cause enormous amounts of stress and anxiety and make mental health conditions distinctly worse. So it's an unholy combination.
Yeah, it really is. I think one of the things is good about this Mental Health Awareness Week this year is I do feel that awareness has never been higher. This kind of thing is working. The kind of all the campaigns that are out there getting people to talk about this and understand that this isn't just about a diagnosed condition. Obviously, they're out there and that does have an impact on so much. But just people who have a short spell where things aren't as they normally would be. Particularly over the last year, a lot of people would have been experiencing anxiety or some sort of mild depression, and they've never had any of these problems before because things have changed. And so we're much more aware of this. And I think, as personal finance journalists, I think it's our role as well to kind of help call out some of the solutions that can help you if that's connected to money worries. And you've been writing about a few sort of technological routes people might be able to take if they're struggling.
Absolutely. I think the development of online banking and online financial management can actually be a real help for people who are having mental health problems, because some of the things that are most difficult to tackle can be things like, phone calls, appointments, even, opening envelopes can be hugely stressful, finding out just what your finances are. And so I think that there are apps that people can use that can make money management a lot better, easier, shall we say. And I think one of the very first things is just signing up for online banking, so that, and setting the kind of alerts that will come through if you are getting close to your overdraft, because that way, you don't have to wade through lots of financial records. You just get a message and it gives you the chance to do something about it. So I think there's two different kinds of advances that I would suggest. One of them is specifically to do with money management. So things like budgeting apps, there are several out there: Yolt, Money Dashboard, Snoop. Those kind of apps where you can see all your accounts in one place without having to log on to lots of separate accounts or remember lots of different passwords. And those can help you with things like budgeting in different categories, so you can see if your spending's going awry. And quite a lot of them will provide prompts if they think you may be overpaying for your bills, and they'll kind of help hold your hand to find better deals, save some money if your finances are getting tricky. The other thing that I think is quite interesting is more on the behavioral side of it, and trying to think about what are the triggers that are causing you to have money worries. The kind of, so for example, if one of the issues is that you're prone to impulse spending in the middle of the night, the kind of insomnia scrolling, then you can get apps that will freeze certain websites. So you kind of set it up in advance, so it won't let you onto that site between certain times. And even things like using apps that will help you get to sleep. That if you get a decent night's sleep, it really helps your mental health. It means you're not shopping online. It can help improve your life. So using things like Baziz or Headspace and mindfulness apps that you might not at first think of as financial money management apps.
Yeah, absolutely. Because obviously there are going to be situations at times where it's reactive to your mental health, these money situations that you have to take action there and then. You can't necessarily prepare for it just by the nature of the financial issue or what's going on with your mental health. But there's plenty you can do while things are, you're feeling better, to kind of get yourself in a place that hopefully, reduces the impact if you do have a bad spell, or maybe even avoids the situation getting so bad that it then pushes, you into more financial stress and into sort of worse financial health. So loads of things out there for people to check out. And I think the most important thing as well is that whether this is affecting you individually, you are worried about your own finances or your mental health, is acknowledging it and talking about it, but also keep an eye out for friends and family members who you feel might be also feeling either of those strains or perhaps both of those strains. Particularly, going back to what we said at the top of the show about things opening up again, the ability for us to see people again, the ability for us to go out and do more. For lots of people, that's very exciting. For lots of people, that's going to be anxiety inducing, because this idea of actually, I've got to go out of my home again, having not done it much for the last year. But also financially, you might think, right, they're going out for dinner again. I can't afford to do this again. So, think about other people as well, that they might not necessarily be in the same situation with you, both with their mental health and their finances.
I think one of the things I'm really looking forward to is that I don't always have to go out, that people might be able to come round. And so if, and I think there are a lot of people that are still going to be concerned about going out in crowded spaces. And even if you can only have one or two people over to see you in the kind of comfort and safety of your own home, that's really nice too.
It really is, isn't it? So let's move on now, and there's been some good and bad news for renters. We talk a lot about home buyers, and there's always a story every week about house prices going up and why they're going up. This week it was about supply and demand. There's not enough property out there, so people are spending more to get the ones that are there. But we don't talk, I think, enough about renters. And as I say, it's good and bad news. Where do you want to start on that one?
Well, I think there has been good news for renters with so many people during the pandemic trying to flee the cities. So if your office wasn't open, if you didn't have the same appeal of all the cultural activities, the restaurants, the theatres, that kind of thing open around you, people have been trying to move out to the country for more space, more outdoor space and gardens. So we've seen rents, especially in London, coming down, and also in big cities such as Edinburgh and Manchester. So that's actually good news if you're considering renting. If your office is opening up now, you can maybe get a good pad for less than you could before.
Yeah, I think these are the places that generally were very, very expensive in the first place. Particularly in London, the proportion of your salary that would go on rent was astronomical, well over 50%. And that's now dropped, and again, dropped in those big cities. I mean, the flip side is that rent has, according to this report from Zoopla, has increased in some of the areas which maybe were less popular before. Again, part of that kind of drive of people to get out of the kind of core cities. So, in a place like Newcastle, rent's up 5%, Belfast up 3.8%, Sheffield up 4.7%, Liverpool up 4.1%. So they're bigger, they're much, they're greater, but which isn't necessarily good for the people local to those cities. But if you were in, London, a 9.4% drop on the average, annual percentage on what you pay in your rent, that's a massive, massive drop, which is, it is much needed.
And one thing perhaps to bear in mind is if you were paying a London rate, if you're moving somewhere like Liverpool and Manchester, even if those rents have gone up by 5%, you're still going to be paying a lot less than you would have done based in London. So if your employer has moved more towards flexible working and you want to take advantage of it, you almost certainly can save money.
Yeah. And there's other renting news this week is the eviction ban, which was been confirmed. It will end on the 31st of May, which means that landlords, if their tenants are in arrears, they can start, issuing eviction processes.
They can, but I think there are some protections still in place for tenants. So I think, you're still going to be required to give 4 months notice, and it isn't till October time that it will come down, well, certainly for England, to the previous 2 months notice period. So there are some protections in place, but I think some enormous proportion are in arrears, so it must be a very worrying time for people who've been struggling to afford their rent during the pandemic.
Yeah, there's been a couple of reports on that in the last few months. 500,000 renters are in arrears, owing an average of £730. And another report showed that 150,000 people are at risk of eviction. So that is a huge number of people who potentially, could find their situation if they've been on furlough or self-employed and the money hasn't come back in. If their incomes are down and they can't start paying back those rents, those rent arrears, what do they do? And they could be sort of forced out. And we know that not everyone has somewhere else they can go. There are the homelessness charities. You're only sort of 1 or 2 things away from actually being on the street. So I think it's really important that we keep an eye on this. But as with so many of these stories, there is a flip side as well, because a surprising stat was that 45% of private landlords only have one property, which means they could very well be relying on that rent money to pay the mortgage or to bring them some kind of income. And they may well have been struggling if they are owed a decent amount of money over the last year. What do they do? It's not all, and obviously there are some landlords out there with plenty of properties and they can kind of, hopefully eat it up. But you've got to look at it from both sides.
Yep. And I think it's the only recourse, I think, for landlords if they were having problems paying their mortgage because their tenants weren't able to pay the rent, was to request mortgage holidays. And just as so many things are coming to an end, kind of special rules during COVID, then so are the chances for requesting a mortgage payment holiday without it affecting your credit record, that's coming to an end too. So I think, there are going to be quite a few landlords that could still be in a tricky position if their tenants continue to be unable to pay rent.
We've got time for one more story, and we could obviously, there's always cryptocurrency things in the news around, Bitcoin and the environmental impact of that, and Elon Musk saying that he's not going to use it as much now because of quite the impact on mining coins has on the carbon emissions. But I think if we stick with a kind of more environmental story that more of us can relate to than Bitcoin, and it involves plastic carrier bags. What's going on in the world of carrier bags?
Well, the charge for single-use carrier bags is doubling. That sounds quite a big rise. In practice, it is just from 5p to up to 10p from the 21st of May. However, we know that the 5p charge already had a massive impact. It saw a reduction in single-use plastic bags by 95%, which is huge. I think you do wonder slightly what people used instead. I think it's been interesting that some of the supermarket chains, I think it's the Co-op and Morrison's, are actually no longer going to be doing plastic bags for life, because there was a concern that they, although more expensive, people didn't actually use them for life. They were tending to use them just for single use. So I think that is going to be the new development. And the more that people can be encouraged to use non-plastic bags and reuse, rather than attempting to buy new or recycle, I'm all in favour of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're right. It's a huge number of fewer bags that people are using. So when this came in 2015, the average amount of plastic bags that a shopper bought a year was 140, and now it's just 4.
4, yeah.
4. And that's, it's just shown that it's worked, and we've all got used to it. This is a kind of a behaviour that at the beginning, I think there was some people were kind of up in arms about it, but most of us sort of saw the point of it, and it's just shown how easy it was for everyone to go, oh, okay, I can just take some bags with me every now and again. Like, we've all been there. You've forgotten it, or maybe you've got one bag too short to get something else. But it's shown that it works on the whole. But whether this sort of doubling the price, and also it's going to be introduced now to every business. Before it was just retailers with more than 250 employees. It's now every single retailer will have to charge you 10p for a bag. But I guess, as you say, maybe the step is to follow the likes of Morrison's and Co-op, and it's to actually just get rid of these plastic bags completely. If you need to buy a bag, make it cost more money, but make it, again, more environmentally friendly. Although I don't know about you, I've now got so many. I used to have so many plastic bags sitting around, and gradually over time got rid of those. I now got just loads and loads of tote bags. Everyone gives you a tote bag now. Not I've been to an event in a year, but you always come back with yet another tote bag. So I guess good thing to do with them, give them to a food bank. They're always after the bags and things. But yeah, I think it's a positive move, definitely.
Yes.
Faith, thank you so much for joining me again today. If people want to find you online, your blog and social media channels, what are the best places for them to go?
My website is muchmorewithless.co.uk, and I'm on Instagram and Twitter at muchmore_less.
Brilliant. Faith, thank you so much.
Thanks, Andy. Glad to be here.
Now, if you want to read up on any of the stories that Faith and I have just been talking about, head over to becleverwithyourcash.com/cashchats194. You'll find links to all the articles with further information. Plus, don't forget, this is one of my podcast episodes. Twice a week, I do an episode of my pod, Cash Chats. You can listen to it on all podcasting apps, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, you name it. Only this episode, the Friday episode, is on YouTube. So if you want more of that, just head over to becleverwithyourcash.com/podcast. I'll link to that up here and below. Until next time, cheers. And here are a couple more videos you might find interesting.